So if you open up a map of a major city, you just naturally assume that the architecture defining the skyline is going to be clearly marked.
Right, of course.
Like you expect the towering glass skyscrapers to have their own distinct footprints right there on the paper. But imagine you're standing right in front of this massive, gleaming 100-story tower. And when you look down at your map, it's just completely invisible.
Just not there at all.
Exactly. The map maker has categorized that exact spot as a vacant lot. Or maybe they just lumped it in with the historic brick post office next door.
Yeah, you wouldn't just question the map at that point. You'd realize that anyone using it to navigate the city is, frankly, flying completely blind to the reality on the ground.
You have to throw it out.
You would. Because an institutional document that cannot see, the most prominent new structure in the environment isn't just a little bit outdated. It is fundamentally rendering a massive piece of reality invisible. And in the financial world, when reality becomes invisible on the ledger, it creates a massive blind spot for anyone trying to understand where capital is actually flowing.
Which brings us perfectly into today's deep dive for you guys, because we are looking at a completely different kind of map today.
Yeah.
One that is currently rendering a massive financial reality completely invisible.
It really is.
We're tearing into the massive and, frankly, highly contradictory numbers coming out of the high-end art market. Our focus today is this really fascinating piece of analysis called the Digital Times H1 2026 Art+Tech report.
Which just dropped on July 15th, 2026.
Exactly. And what this report brilliantly does is it takes the first half results that Christie's, the legendary auction house, just self-reported, and then it checks the math against independent survey data from the Art Basel and UBS Global Art Market Report 2026.
And the methodology here is what makes the Digital Times report so vital. They utilize this specific dual lens approach.
Dual lens, yeah.
Yeah, so with the first lens, they examine the surface data, the headline-grabbing, multi-billion-dollar numbers that get blasted out in press releases. But instead of taking that at face value, they apply a second lens.
To dig a little deeper.
Exactly. They place that Christie's data on a longer timeline and contrast it against the independent Art Basel survey data. Crucially, they keep those two data sets in constant tension. They basically refuse to let the noise of a flashy auction headline obscure the actual underlying architecture of the market.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the central mystery we're going to unravel today is a massive, glaring contradiction.
Oh, it's huge.
According to the data, online art sales have just plummeted to a 6-year low. Yet simultaneously, independent data proves that digital art has skyrocketed to become a top 3 collecting medium for high-net-worth individuals globally.
Which, on the surface, that sounds entirely impossible.
Right.
I mean, the intuitive leap is that if the asset itself is purely digital, the acquisition of that asset must also be digital. But as the data proves, making that assumption is exactly how you misread the map and miss the skyscraper entirely.
Yeah, so to understand how a top-tier digital asset can just essentially vanish from the digital sales record, we first have to look at the sheer scale of the money moving through these traditional channels.
Which is astronomical.
Christie's self-reported numbers for the first half of 2026 are nothing short of staggering. They reported a total revenue of $4.5 billion in just 6 months.
And the velocity of that capital is incredible. When you isolate just their auction sales from that total, they are up 71% year on year.
Wow.
Right. To frame that historically, this represents their strongest first half in 5 years. We aren't looking at a stagnant legacy market here. We are looking at an institution that is moving massive amounts of wealth at an accelerating pace.
So Christie's categorizes that $3.5 billion chunk of auction sales into 5 specific legacy clusters, right? And looking at how they group this money is our first clue to the systemic blind spot.
Exactly.
The heavyweight champion of their ledger, which, shouldn't surprise anyone, is 20th and 21st century art. That single cluster pulled in $2,313 million.
Which is a 79% increase year on year.
Right. So it remains the anchor of the modern art market. Over $2 billion concentrated in contemporary and modern works. Below that, we see the luxury cluster. So watches, jewelry, handbags bringing in $539 million, which is a steady 15% bump.
Pretty standard.
Yeah. Asian and world art accounted for $249 million, showing a very healthy 60% increase.
And then we get down to the oldest, most traditional category.
Right, the really old stuff. Classics came in at $241 million, and old masters at $183 million. That brings the total across those 5 specific clusters to 3,526 million, driving that 71% overall auction growth.
Right.
But wait, look closely at the velocity on the other end of the timeline here. We just established that the contemporary stuff has all the sheer volume, over $2 billion. But the explosive percentage growth is happening in the oldest categories.
Yeah, the contrast is wild.
Classics are up 168% year on year, and old masters up 232%.
What's fascinating here is how percentage growth can act as a flare, highlighting hidden surges in market activity that volume alone might mask.
Definitely.
It's entirely counterintuitive. You would expect the explosive triple-digit growth to happen in emerging contemporary markets. But a 232% jump in old masters indicates a massive sudden shift in a space that is normally defined by extreme scarcity and, very low turnover.
Right, because by definition, there are only so many old masters in existence.
Exactly. The supply is absolutely capped. We aren't going to suddenly discover a warehouse full of new Renaissance masterpieces.
Just sitting there waiting to be sold.
Precisely. So a year-on-year jump of that magnitude usually points to a convergence of unique factors. It could be major, historically significant estates suddenly liquidating assets all at once.
Oh, that makes sense.
Or, zooming out to the macroeconomic picture, it often indicates a flight to safety. When new markets feel volatile, immense capital often seeks the perceived permanence and historical fortification of antiquities.
Yeah.
It proves that these legacy categories are experiencing explosive volatility and renewed interest, even if the total dollar amount is dwarfed by contemporary art.
That is a crucial distinction for anyone analyzing market reports. Volume and velocity are two entirely different metrics. 20th century art clearly owns the volume, but old masters suddenly command the velocity.
Exactly.
But knowing what is selling doesn't tell us who is buying it. When you look at the demographics attached to the paddles driving this $4.5 billion wave, the old guard is rapidly being replaced.
Yeah, the demographic shift is arguably the most disruptive data point in the entire Christie's release. The tectonic plates of the art market are audibly shifting beneath these legacy categories.
The influx of new wealth is just staggering. According to the report, nearly half, 47% to be exact, of all new clients for Christie's in this first half of 2026 were millennials, or Gen Z.
Almost half.
Almost half. Furthermore, 63% of all new bidders and buyers enter the Christie's ecosystem via online channels.
Right, and for an institution that has spent centuries catering to older, established wealth in highly exclusive physical spaces, those adoption numbers represent a total paradigm shift.
It's like a legacy Wall Street bank built entirely on in-person handshakes, mahogany boardrooms, and paper contracts suddenly having to process billions in decentralized finance transactions because an entire generation of tech founders just showed up at the front door.
That's a perfect analogy.
They're utilizing the institution, but their native language is entirely digital.
And that structural friction between the legacy institution and the new digital native client is exactly where the dual lens of the Phygital Times report becomes critical.
How so?
Because if we stop our analysis at the demographic data, we would naturally conclude that the entire art market has transitioned online. We would assume that the Christie's app is facilitating this multi-billion-dollar boom.
But the actual revenue data completely shatters that assumption. If 63% of the new wealth is coming in through the digital door, you would expect the online revenue to reflect that dominance.
You really would.
Yet, out of that $3.5 billion auction total across the clusters, only $200 million came from online sales.
Only $200 million out of $3.5 billion. That means the online sales channel represents just about 6% of the total auction volume?
Wait, only 6%?
Just 6%.
That completely defies logic. If the Gen Z and millennial wealth is flooding in through the app, but the app is only doing 6% of the volume, what are they actually doing online? Are they just treating Christie's digital portal like a glossy catalog to window shop and then taking their actual checkbooks somewhere else when it's time to spend the big money?
It certainly looks that way at first glance.
And more importantly, the report notes that this 6% share means online sales have fallen to their lowest level since 2019. It's actively shrinking.
The digital sales footprint is shrinking exactly at the moment when digital native clients are becoming the dominant new demographic. To resolve this paradox, we have to look closely at what the Christie's reporting structure is stubbornly refusing to acknowledge on its ledger.
Okay, let's pull that map back out. Think back to those 5 legacy clusters we just dissected. 20th and 21st century art, luxury, Asian and world art, classics, and old masters.
Right.
Look at the negative space. Look at what is entirely missing from that list. There is no line item for digital art. There is no category for AI art.
Which is an astonishing omission from a data architecture standpoint.
Truly.
And the lack of an AI category is particularly glaring given the timeline. The Phygital Times report highlights a critical piece of context here. These H1 2026 numbers were published a full 16 months after Christie staged the very first AI-dedicated auction anywhere in the world.
Wait, really? 16 months?
Yes, they literally pioneered the space. Yet, 16 months later, AI art still has no dedicated tracking category in their cluster report. The asset class simply doesn't exist in their official taxonomy.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this sets up the ultimate clash of facts. We have Christie's self-reported data showing their online sales channel shrinking to a 6-year low, sitting at a marginal 6%.
Right.
Meanwhile, the Phygital Times applies their second lens, pulling in the independent survey data from the Art Basel and UBS Global Art Market Report 2026. And that independent global data confirms that digital art has just surged into the top 3 media by collecting spend among high-net-worth individuals.
It is not a fringe experiment anymore. It is a top 3 dominant asset class globally for the wealthiest collectors on the planet.
So how do we reconcile this? How can digital art be dominating the global spend, outperforming almost everything else to reach the top 3, while the online sales numbers at the world's premier auction house are a rounding error at 6%?
It's a massive disconnect.
Is the institutional resistance so strong that high-net-worth individuals are just completely bypassing Christie's to buy their digital art on specialized blockchain platforms?
No. They are absolutely buying these digital masterpieces at Christie's. But to understand how a massive digital asset boom can look like a digital sales recession, you have to understand the underlying architecture of how auction houses classify data.
Okay.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we realize that these 2 data points, shrinking online sales and booming digital art, don't contradict each other at all.
The contradiction is just an illusion created by the map.
Precisely. The illusion relies on a very common categorical error. The fundamental flaw in the ledger is that it conflates the asset class with the transaction channel.
Ah, okay.
Christie's is tracking how the money physically changes hands, but the public assumes they are tracking what the money is actually buying. The medium is the asset pixels, code, generative algorithms. The channel is the mechanism of the purchase, clicking a button on a website versus raising a wooden paddle in a physical room.
Okay, this is the massive blind spot. The map is meticulously labeling the toll booths on the highway, but it has absolutely no way to categorize the cargo inside the trucks driving through them.
Exactly.
Let's build a concrete mechanical example to make the mechanics of this crystal clear for everyone listening, because this completely changes how you have to read financial reports.
Yeah, let's trace a single hypothetical transaction step by step to see exactly how the legacy architecture absorbs and, well, erases the digital reality.
Okay, let's invent a buyer. She is part of that dominant 47% demographic, a high-net-worth Gen Z collector. She built her wealth in the tech sector. She deeply understands blockchain provenance. She is passionate about generative AI algorithms, and she wants to purchase a major headline piece of purely digital or AI art.
She has the capital, and she wants the prestige piece. Now, put yourself in the shoes of the auction house. Because this is a major multi-million-dollar piece of art, Christie's is not going to just quietly upload it to their website with a digital shopping cart.
Right, no way.
High-value art sales require theater. They require the psychological pressure of a bidding war. They demand prestige. So they place this purely digital artwork into a high-profile evening live auction event in New York or London.
And because they're accounting software, their taxonomy doesn't have a digital art cluster. They have to force this square peg into a round hole. They look at the generative AI piece and say, well, it was made this year, so we'll group it under the 20th and 21st century art cluster.
Exactly. The digital artwork is now sitting inside a legacy category on the books. Now the evening of the auction arrives.
Our Gen Z tech founder isn't sitting at home clicking a mouse on the Christie's app to spend $5 million. She wants the white glove service.
Of course.
She is either sitting in the front row of the physical auction room holding a traditional wooden paddle, or she has a dedicated agent standing on the telephone bank at the side of the room, bidding in real time on her behalf. The auctioneer points to her agent on the phone bank, the hammer comes down, and she wins the digital artwork for $5 million.
And right there, at the strike of the gavel, the trap snaps shut on the data.
Oh, wow.
The buyer just acquired a purely digital, blockchain-verified asset. But look at the mechanism of the transaction.
The mechanism was entirely analog. It happened via a live telephone bid managed by a human being at an in-person physical event.
Correct. Therefore, Christie's internal reporting system logs that $5 million transaction as a live channel sale. It is explicitly not recorded as an online channel sale, despite the art itself being entirely composed of computer code.
That's crazy.
And furthermore, because there is no digital art cluster on their ledger, that $5 million is quietly absorbed into the $2.3 billion total for 20th and 21st century art.
That is absolutely wild. The medium is digital, but because the mechanism of the sale is analog, the digital nature of the asset is completely erased from the record.
Yep.
You can buy purely digital art through a purely physical legacy channel. And because the auction house categorizes the revenue based on the mechanism of the sale rather than the ontology of the art, the map shows a vacant lot where a skyscraper actually sits.
The asset becomes entirely invisible on the surface data. This is the grand resolution to the contradiction.
And I see it now.
The digital art market is booming invisibly, entirely camouflaged inside the traditional live auction numbers. The massive wave of capital flowing into AI and digital works is plumping up the 20th and 21st century art cluster, which makes that legacy category look incredibly dominant.
Right.
Meanwhile, because these high-value digital pieces aren't being bought via web browsers, the online sales metric looks deceptively small, shrinking down to that 6%.
Because in the context of this specific institutional ledger, online sales doesn't mean the sale of digital assets. It literally just means items purchased via a web browser without human intervention.
That's it.
The 6% online share is likely made up of lower value, high volume items, prints, entry-level watches, maybe wine, things that people feel comfortable just clicking to buy.
Yeah.
The heavy-hitting top 3 preferred digital art is being bought over the phone in a room with a guy holding a gavel.
Precisely. The Digital Times report uses that dual lens to prove that the young digital native wealth is absolutely reshaping the market. They are driving digital art into the top 3 global media.
Yeah.
But they are utilizing the established legacy infrastructure of the physical auction house to execute those trades. They are pouring a completely new asset class into a centuries-old architecture, and the institution hasn't updated the labels on the architecture to reflect what is actually moving through it.
So what does this all mean when we step back from the art world? Like, why does a specific quirk in auction house accounting matter if you aren't in the market for a $5 million AI painting?
Fair question.
Well, this deep dive is fundamentally a masterclass in data literacy for you. It proves that whether you are analyzing real estate, the tech sector, or global finance, you cannot just read the headline numbers of an industry report and take them as gospel.
You really can't.
You have to interrogate the methodology. You have to understand how the underlying architecture of the data collection can completely mask the reality of the market. If you only looked at the surface data of this report, you would advise your clients that digital art was dead and traditional online shopping was failing.
And you'd be entirely wrong.
Exactly. But when you understand the mechanics of the ledger, you see a massive invisible boom happening right under the surface.
And this raises an incredibly important question, which is perhaps the most critical takeaway for anyone relying on institutional data to make decisions.
Lay it on us.
When an institution's categories are so deeply rooted in their historical past, when their reporting software is still meticulously tracking the velocity of classics and old masters, but they fundamentally cannot explicitly track the most modern, rapidly surging asset classes like digital and AI, they are manufacturing their own obsolescence.
Wow.
They are creating a massive systemic blind spot. If your map cannot adapt to show the new skyscrapers being built, eventually the people navigating the city are going to stop using your map entirely.
That thought brings us perfectly to the edge of our next exploration. We've seen exactly how digital art is booming invisibly, hiding inside a legacy reporting system that refuses to name it.
Right.
But what are the long-term consequences of that invisibility? For our next deep dive, we'll be taking this final thought and running with it, asking the vital question: what happens to a medium the reporting system can't see?
It's going to be a fascinating look at the intersection of cultural value, financial recognition, and the hidden dynamics that shape emerging markets.
It really is. Remember, sometimes the most important information isn't in the massive data points, but in the glaring gaps between the categories. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Digital Times report, and until next time, keep questioning the map.
Thanks for listening.